Welcome to Critter Crusades, the show about ordinary people on extraordinary missions to help animals. I'm Missy Woodward. Thanks for joining us. Today we have a wonderful segment on dog training, the things you need to do in case you have a rescued animal, you want to help with the animal you already have. I want to welcome Andrea Smith. Welcome.
Hello.
You're a dog trainer and behaviorist.
Yes.
So you've been doing this a long time. How long?
Probably about 10 years. Not exactly training. It started out as veterinary medicine. That was my first love. And then I kind of swayed away from that and got into pack animal training and obedience and puppy and all that stuff.
So what I like about your story is that you've done everything sort of just by gut instinct. A lot of people go to training classes, they go into a school, decide this is going to be my career path, and you've sort of evolved into this through all of your exciting experiences. I'm going to back up and go to where this first began, I believe in New York City. Yes. Correct? And you're working with a veterinarian, or how was that at the beginning?
Well, the beginning, let's see. I started out as a fashion model. Oh, okay. And I hated it. And I can just remember kind of sitting in the dog park. There was this open dog park in the middle of Manhattan. And I was sitting there and I was holding my book and I was like, what am I going to do with this career? What am I going to do with this book? What am I doing? And there were about 20 dogs kind of playing around me. And I remember just getting up and walking across, just walking towards the gate. And I looked back and all 20 dogs were kind of just standing there looking at me. And I was like, okay, maybe I can work with dogs. So I just started volunteering at a veterinary hospital and kind of started from there.
So it was just that moment, that cathartic moment that you just saw those faces. So I know that you've done a lot of volunteer work through the ASPCA and other groups. One of the most exciting things I think you told me about was some work that you did after the World Trade Center bombing. And how did you get involved with ASPCA, and how did it evolve to the point that you got involved helping during the 9/11 incident?
Okay. Well, the ASPCA was really big and still is in New York. They offered a lot of behavioral programs about 10 years ago, and I kind of threw myself into those programs. And I met a trainer there, and she kind of took me under her wing, and I would go to her classes and, you know, pick up poop and help out and, you know, meet the dogs. And one day she asked me, she said, would you like to work at the World Trade Center, at the relief center? The dogs that were doing search and rescue, after their day, they would come back and sort of hang out and get fed and water and sleep and all that stuff. But, I mean, as we know, 9/11 was really stressful, not just for the people, but for the dogs as well. They weren't really finding any bodies, so they were really stressed out. And they would come back to the facility and be really agitated. They were mostly German Shepherds. And I just remember there was this one day where we were just kind of hanging out, and it was really quiet. There were a few kids hanging around, and the dogs just kind of went crazy. They all started fighting each other. I just remember, because it's kind of blank, I just remember getting up and running into the crowd, making a lot of noise, grabbing a few dogs, and pulling some dogs back. There was blood involved. That was the day.
And that sort of began that other direction that you went with getting engaged with the pack animals, which we'll talk about. So they were very stressed because they did not find any bodies and they were searching, and I know that's very difficult on search and rescue animals. So people that are working with them, they need to know that there needs to be a lot of play that they need afterwards?
Yes,
or what do
I
you
was
do?
doing play therapy.
And what does that entail?
We were just hanging out. I was doing a lot of petting, walking them around, having them follow me. I was kind of new to the whole thing, so in my mind, I was just hanging out with a couple of dogs, giving them water, throwing toys, introducing them to kids, that kind of thing.
So I see something that you have in a book you brought me, which I thought was really wonderful, an acknowledgement from the ASPCA saying, I'm writing to commend the actions of Miss Andrea Smith during her service as a volunteer for the ASPCA. She was assigned to the Family Assistance Center, where she assisted with managing the many therapy dogs teams providing comfort to the victims of the World Trade Center disaster. She demonstrated very advanced social and organizational skills during the many hours she committed to the Family Assistance Center. However, it was her ability to respond to a genuine emergency that so impressed me. During a serious incident of dog-on-dog aggression, Andrea intervened in a very effective manner that prevented greater harm to both the dogs and other people. Her actions were quicker and more appropriate than those of the dog owners. It's my impression that Andrea will excel at any career that involves animals, and it was from the Director of Counseling Services. What an honor to just say that you were able to go out there and you just had this gut instinct.
Yep.
So then you knew that you were moving on. You understood this pack mentality, or you had some feeling for it. So what did you next do there in New York? Where did your career then go?
I kind of stayed in the veterinary medicine. I just kind of floated from veterinary to veterinarian to veterinarian. And as we know with veterinary medicine, when you become an assistant, you can be as far up as assisting in surgery. So I had actually gotten to that point where I was learning how to draw blood. I was handling sutures and all that stuff. And then it got to a point where I realized, I know this is weird, but I wasn't really eating at work. Like, I would go 10 hours just not eating, and I just didn't have an appetite. And I realized over time, months had passed, and I just really didn't have an appetite at work. So I realized this whole blood thing may not be part of what I'm going to be used to or can deal with, but I still wanted to deal with dogs. And just so happened, I met these guys. They were interested in opening up a facility in New York. Doggy daycare was kind of fresh and new at the time. Actually having dogs in a facility and off leash was a whole new kind of responsibility for that kind of business. But I was game for it. There were no dogs at the time. It was just a big old garage space. And I actually went over from the vet's office from where I was working during my lunch break, went to the facility, and they were asking me, well, what would you do to the facility? Or how would you design it? Or how would you deal with the dogs? And I was kind of just answering the questions as I went along. I didn't really have a pre-program. And so time opened up, Christmas came. We had a dog that was sent to the facility. I was there acting as the manager, but there was no staff. And I remember this one big, huge pit bull. And I was sitting over Christmas with the dog, me and the dog, for like 3 days straight. And people were kind of afraid of it. I'm just going to keep him close, just hang out with him. Parents came home and they paid a lot of money, and that became my job. It started as one dog and it ended up about 125.
And so that pack mentality stayed there at that location. I know they even, let's see, I think they wrote about you in just a basic little magazine called Time Magazine. They kind of just said, oh, it's just this kind of really incredible place that they go in there. And so they talk about the pack situation that they had there. So what a coup for you to make Time Magazine and to be able to say, you know, I do this professionally. So from there, you went on, and did you stay in New York for much longer? Or?
I stayed there maybe a half a year past 9/11. And at the time, I didn't really consider myself a trainer. I consider myself, and which I still consider myself, an animal handler. I learned a lot through just working at vets, dealing with stressed out animals, how to handle them when they're in their most fearful, sort of painful situations. So that kind of gave me like a stronghold and sort of confidence towards how to handle dogs. I wasn't really into the literary thing of what it was to be a trainer. But then I came to LA and I said, okay, this is an animal town. You know, everyone's enthusiastic about their dogs. They want to train them. They want to exercise them. There are a lot of animal dog people out here. So I kind of clicked into that energy and just decided to become a private trainer. So
we have some tape of what you do on sort of a normal everyday day here. You go into packs of dogs at a facility and you just walk in, and all of a sudden, like the Pied Piper, they start doing something. So this is really fascinating. You just walk into a room, and tell us what happens here.
Well, I hadn't been there in a couple of days, so they were really, really excited. And when I come in the beginning, they're so excited that, I mean, I know they're animals. I can't control everything, even though I'm a trainer. I let them get their moment of being excited, but I don't really approach them. I just kind of walk around them. I try not to give them too much eye contact and engaging them. And I just let them do their thing. I let them communicate with each other. Barking isn't necessarily bad for dogs. We think it's horrible between humans and dogs, but with dogs, that's how they communicate. They bark at each other. They have certain tones. I incorporate those tones into my training sometimes. I learn a lot from them. The way that they communicate with each other, I incorporate it in my training as well.
Great. So they all calm down, and there's this many dogs on a day that you
Yep.
have to work with, and
Yep.
they all get along, or
They do get along. I mean, there's moments where they get a little crazy, but for the most part, they get along. They respect the pack.
And so this is you training. Let's see what you're telling or talking to these people
Gains
about.
exposure to the things that he's barking and growling at, and that's why we're here, so that he can be social and deal with all the other things that are happening. So I don't want to have so much playing with him when I have him on when I'm putting him on leash. So I want to make that process as short as possible. And I see that he's playing excessively, so I'm just going to kind of contain him a little bit. And I'm putting all of his energy, his play energy, his biting energy towards the toys. Not my fingers, not the leash, everything towards the toys. You're not walking down the street with your puppy saying, no, no, stop, stop, no, no, no. A lot of times you give them too much negative, too much no, they don't know what they're supposed to do. So we're just replacing it and showing them what he should be doing. Teddy, come. Good boy. Sit. Up, sit, sit. Oh, that's great. Okay, come on. That's great.
That's interesting. You're going from the big pack animal situation to the little fluffy white puppy, so you have kind of an interesting day where you switch around in a lot of different areas. But that puppy training is really vitally important for people starting out to have a good relationship. I want to talk some about rescued animals, because we here on Critter Crusades, our focus is about helping people to help rescued animals, to focus on what needs to be done. Now that's a little fluffy white puppy that's got a great opportunity in life, that hasn't been sitting in a shelter, hasn't been on the streets. What do you do when you encounter those types of situations and working with those type of animals, especially the bully breeds, and explain on top of that really the discrimination about these different bully breeds?
Let's see. Well, I do think that, I don't know, we get, a lot of times, I'm going to switch around. If you have a dog that's a Chihuahua or Cocker Spaniel, and they nip someone on the ankle, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to say anything, because they're so cute, and you don't want to make your grandmother mad, you know, that kind of thing. But the bully breeds, I mean, I don't, you know, not acknowledge the damage that they can do if they do bite. I mean, dogs bite. All dogs bite.
Now, I know you're sitting here right now telling me that with 27 stitches that you got 2 days ago in your ankle.
Yep.
And you don't resent the animal.
Absolutely
you don't have
not.
any problem working the next day or that afternoon. It's just par for the course, and it was a situation.
Yep.
So I understand. You really you really walk the walk.
I mean, I know that dogs and other animals, of course, bite out of fear. Part of being a trainer for me is to decrease the fear in the animal, whether it's a trauma that they've experienced or just the way that the human is communicating to the dog at the time, especially kids. A lot of times kids, when they meet a dog, they're hanging over their face and they're moving. Dogs have to get used to that kind of stimulation. They're just not born to accept hands and waving and movement. So a lot of times if you have a dog that has been abused or a dog that is in a rescue and you don't know what their background is, to approach the dog and to do that kind of motion is going to cause a certain amount of fear. So in this particular situation, when I got bit, I was in the pack. I know the pack can be overstimulating sometimes. And we were actually trying to work with a dog that is a rescue that we are hoping someday to get a good home for, and it is a bully breed. And I know that this dog I knew that this dog was sort of a fear biter. And I was very careful handling the dog, but it just happened that day I didn't see the dog. I mean, part of my job as well is to, try to deal with them as much as I can behaviorally and, as a species and a breed. But at the same time, animals are very fast. And I know people that work with animals, there's always that moment where, oh, I wish I would have been looking, or I turn my back for 1 second. And I respect them for that level. They've made me more agile and more fast and quick thinking. So I do respect that, but came out of nowhere, bit me. I didn't feel it at first, and then I looked and I was like, I didn't even feel it because there was so much stimulation going on, and then I looked down and I'm like, that's not my leg. But at the same time, what was going on at the time was the rest of the pack was just sort of licking me and trying to console me, and then I ran out of the facility and I could hear them howling in the background.
And what does that mean?
That they were sad, that they knew that something was wrong and that they were responding to it.
Interesting.
And
so
that's cool.
That's where the pack knowledge comes in, because they howl for certain reasons. Like you said, there's a whole communication. Now, the animal that did the injury to you, how did that animal respond? Was
that animal,
does it get ostracized by the pack, or what
it
happened?
needs so much rehabilitation that it didn't even notice it was totally reacting. Okay. And that lets me know how I'm going to approach the training. A lot of times I've been bit, especially, because puppies are always testing you. As they get older, it's no longer puppy testing. It turns into full biting. But there's some times where I've been bit, and my whole routine is just to ignore it, like to kind of say, your biting doesn't hurt me, even though it does. But I want to let them know that, okay, what are you going to do next? Because the biting doesn't hurt, so we have to communicate differently. And I think I wouldn't throw myself out there all the time because it's my skin, but
exactly.
When it happens, I try to sort of just, try to not get so overexcited about it.
Because that stimuli really encourages. Now, sometimes you'll be at a dog park and you'll see animals, and I don't know if it's just because it's an animal that has been in a rescued situation, but all of a sudden you'll see them just take on one dog, and it might be, I know there's the alpha and the omega and all that. They do need some sort of release by beating up on one animal sometime. I've seen that in wolf pack documentaries. But what causes that for them to all of a sudden just take out after one dog?
I mean, there could be a couple of situations. I mean, that could be the dog that looked like the dog that attacked them from before. It could be a trauma situation. A memory thing. It could be a dominant dog that wants to test, like you said, test its dominance. So it's looking for the most, in their eyes, the weakest of the pack to test. A lot of times it could be space issues. I mean, dogs in the most fearful situation, if they have nothing else, they have their space. So when we invade that space, or if another dog invades that space, it could cause some kind of reaction.
What is the most important thing someone should do when let's say they go into the shelter and they're looking for an animal to choose to have as a family member and for them to become a guardian of? What should they look at as far as for themselves? How should they assess themselves? And how should they assess the dog?
Well, they should first try to figure out if they have the time to have a pet. If you have the time, if you have the help. At this point, I never thought about it at this point, but now I can say if you have someone to watch the dog when you go on vacation. Obviously, there's a lot of daycare facilities that are around, so research those places. Take your dog by those places. Let your dog sniff and see if that's a place that they want to stay at. I know that seems weird, but at least it makes them feel like, oh, I'm not being abandoned when you just drop them off. So make sure you know how they're going to be taken care of when you're not there. Research proper diet and nutrition. Make sure that you can afford vet bills. And then just go in kind of with an open attitude. If you're looking for a breed specific, then that's a different situation. But when you're looking for a dog, I kind of like to look at the fact that they find you. Like you kind of just make yourself open. You go in. You have the right attitude, and you get a dog that's similar to your personality. If you're lazy, you like to lay on the couch, get a lazy dog. If you like to exercise, get a dog to go hiking with, that kind of thing.
So a Jack Russell or a Border Collie for an apartment dweller that likes to watch TV all day is not exactly a good match.
Unless they're a senior.
All right.
Senior dogs are always a good option as well.
Oh, that's great.
Because they're all pretty lazy, except German Shepherds.
So when you get a client that has a rescue dog, what are some of the first things you do and work with them on?
Boundaries. How will you set up this new pet into your environment? Because if you don't, then the dog will kind of come and take over your area, and then you already have a problem with obedience. Because now they've become the alpha dog, and you've become like the beta or the omega or however you want to say it. But make sure you set up boundaries and proper housebreaking, nutrition, that kind of thing.
In your experience with rescued dogs, what are some of the more common traits that you see that are very easy to solve, but that are common traits that people get frustrated and then dumping them back at the pound?
Housebreaking.
Okay, housebreaking. What are some of the tips that you can give on housebreaking a rescued animal, especially one that may have been abused by someone?
The best thing, especially with rescues, is that you don't know the dog. You just met the dog. And there's a big history behind it, especially if you get a dog that's 2 or 3 years old. So before you can assume that this is the dog's personality, because we like to do that all the time, it's better to sort of bring the dog into your environment, give them proper boundaries, and then observe them. Nothing. No training, just observing, seeing what their personalities are like, what scares them, what are their issues, and just proper boundaries and a routine. Dogs definitely need a routine.
What would be another trait that you might see that discourages people when they first have a new dog and they say, this is this problem I keep having over and over again, it's not going to get solved, I should have picked another dog? Or
could be anxiety, or
what about the what did we call it when you leave the home and they're gone?
Separation anxiety.
Yes, and you said that's one of your favorite things to deal with.
That's one of my favorite things to deal with.
How would you like separation anxiety? What do you like about it?
The thing I like about it is it doesn't change overnight. It's something that takes a lot of work and commitment. But once you work it through, you have a really independent, cool dog. A lot of times when you see people with their dogs and they're just hanging out and the dog's hanging out over there and they're hanging out over here, that's pretty much a good situation. It creates independence. I mean, dogs are pack animals, so they believe that they need each other to survive. Now that we've domesticated them, we've taken on a lot of the responsibilities, but we're still in their minds what they need to survive. So if we have this big bonding thing where we're just kind of hanging out and we're getting to know them and the dog is bonding with us, and then all of a sudden you decide, I'm going to go work my 8-hour job a day, the dog doesn't go for that. To them, it creates anxiety because they believe now that they can't survive. So one of the things I like to say about separation anxiety is get your dog used to being independent in the beginning. Even if it means tethering them to a table and you're just hanging out and watching TV. They don't have to always be on top of you. And then leave the room and come back.
I heard, and what I used to do with my dog was I would leave the house. I would never say anything like, oh, goodbye, goodbye.
Yep,
I would just say,
absolutely.
Guard the house. And I'd say it in a very deep voice.
Yep.
And he'd turn his head both directions and look.
Yep.
And when I would walk in, I would never acknowledge him for 5 minutes.
Absolutely.
And I understood that's what the alpha does in the wolf pack. They walk in, they ignore everyone, and the others have to follow the alpha.
Yep. And I usually, when I walk in, I don't acknowledge the dog if he's jumping or, demanding attention. I wait until they're submitted or they're calm, and then I give them affection, because then they realize if I'm calm and submitted, I can get affection all the time. That's the only thing that they remember are the good things.
And when you work with an animal, I'm a very big advocate of spay and neuter, but if you work with an animal that's not spayed or neutered, there's probably really special things you have to do around them and working around other animals, correct?
Yes, I usually try to keep them a little more separate. And usually the dogs that I deal with now are mostly spayed and neutered. That's a good thing.
That's great.
So I don't really have that problem as much. I usually try to tell some people that don't neuter like their male dogs, It may not be that your male dog is mean or aggressive, but other dogs are going to take it as a threat. They're going to smell it, and they may attack your dog.
Right.
So a lot of times that the owners say, okay, then I got to get my dog neutered. Because if it's going to endanger their dog, then usually they'll respond better.
Right, and that's one of the things I know you're so great at helping other people get their animals, getting homes for animals if something does happen to their animal, which is an unfortunate thing that, let's say they're having another child in the family or something happens. I know you're very big at trying to find a new home for them. In these last minutes, what are some of the important quick tips that people need to think about when they're working with their animals, some quick ideas that can help it make a better life experience for them?
Just remember the 3 Ps, persistence, patience, and definitely praise.
So glad you came on the show today, and you've given us some great tips, some great ideas as to what to do with animals, especially with these rescued animals, finding those boundaries, finding ways to work with them so that their life can be more comfortable and make a much more comfortable situation in the home life. I hope that people can take advantage of your services and other animal trainers' services, because I think that's so important. A happy animal makes just a whole happy family.
Yep.
Well, thanks a lot. And
Thank
you everybody for joining us here on Critter Crusades, the show about ordinary people on extraordinary missions to help animals. Go out, get involved. Remember, don't litter, spay and neuter. Thanks for joining us. Yeah,